As I said earlier, when we had just a few people on, we're going to be talking about the transfer disclosure today. I know it's not the most exciting topic, but again, I want to make sure that you guys are aware of how this form has to be filled out, the information that's required from your seller, the information that's required from you, what your duties are, and I want to make sure that you guys are as clear as you can possibly be on this, because it's really important. Most disputes between buyer and seller emanate from this form, right? This and the SPQ. So we're going to do this today, and probably next Thursday we'll do the SPQ. So I am going to share my screen with you guys, and you should be looking at the real estate transfer disclosure. So the first thing I want to say is that you shouldn't be touching anything south of no substituted disclosures, right? That's on this first page. That's the limit of what you fill out, and basically what that is the address and the seller's or the property's name, right, and the county and all that stuff, and the date that these were done. So it's important that we do the date, right? And this is why it's important that we do the date that it was completed, because things could change. So this is a disclosure as of today. This is my knowledge as seller as of this specific date of the property. And the thing that we want to understand with the transfer disclosure, is the seller aware? Basically, that's the question through the whole process of going through the transfer disclosure when the seller's making their disclosures is, are you, the seller, aware? So there could be things that are wrong with the property that the seller has no knowledge of. None. Right? There could be. So that's why this disclosure is only the things that they are possibly aware of. So that's why you have to think of it as we go through all these things. Are you, the seller, aware? Okay, so let's look at what it says, right? It says, and I'm not going to read it verbatim, but this is a statement of disclosure to the condition of above described property in compliance with the civil code. As of this date, it is not a warranty of any kind by the seller or the agents, and it says, or any agents representing any principals in this transaction, and is not a substitute for any inspections or warranties the principals may wish to attain, right? So just because I put on here, this is what is staying with the property, or because, hold on a second, guys. Oh, never mind. My phone was going. So just because it says this is what's staying with the property, or it's a disclosure about the condition of something, it is not a warranty or a guarantee. Okay, so keep that in mind. Next, let's move on here. The real estate transfer disclosure statement is made pursuant. We don't need to worry about the civil code. Other statutes require disclosures depending on the details of the particular real estate transaction. For example, special study zones and purchase money liens on residential property. Substituted disclosures. The following disclosures and other disclosures are required by law, including the natural hazard disclosure report or statement that may include airport annoyances, earthquake, fire, flood, or special assessment information have or will be made in connection with this real estate transfer and are intended to satisfy the disclosure obligations on this form where the subject matter is the same. So what that means is this. If I provide to you an NHD report, right, which we all do, we pay for that NHD report, we hire a company that does it, they answer the questions on the flood zones, fire zones, earthquake, seismic hazards, right? If I provide you the NHD report and that NHD report has a disclosure in it that would cover a disclosure that could have been or should have been made in this TDS, and the seller didn't make that disclosure because they didn't have knowledge of it, I'm still protected from that lack of disclosure in the TDS because it was disclosed in another disclosure that I'm required to provide. You guys follow me on that? So it's not saying that I don't have to do this disclosure if I do the others. What it's saying is if something gets missed in this, because I didn't have maybe the knowledge of it, but it's covered in another disclosure that's provided to the buyers, I'm protected. Okay? Yes. Somebody said, who was that? Somebody have a question? Okay. So the next are these check boxes. Inspection reports completed pursuant to the contract of sale or receipt or deposit. Like these are things that we're going to be attaching to the TDS, right? Additional inspection reports or disclosures, or no substituted disclosures for this transfer. So what we're saying here is that if, let's say, for example, that the seller had already done a termite report or had already done a physical home inspection or professional home inspection, right? And we've talked about this in the past. If I am an absentee owner, right, I'm still required. If I haven't lived in my home, in the home that I own for 20 years, I have the same duty to provide disclosures to the buyer as if I lived in that property for 20 years. Now, my knowledge of what I'm about to disclose may be different because I didn't live in it, but it doesn't exempt me from making the disclosure. Meaning, if it's something I clearly should have known, right, I still have the duty to disclose it. I can't just write it off as, well, I didn't live in it, so you're on your own. But, so, let's say, for example, I didn't live in it for 20 years, and I want to make sure I'm protected. I don't have somebody that's going to come back to me and say, you failed to disclose this and you should have known about it. I may hire a professional home inspector to do an inspection prior to opening escrow, and then as part of my TDS, I incorporate that inspection, right? So I could check off the box that there are inspection reports completed pursuant to the contract of sale or receipt of deposit that are here. Like maybe the buyer asked me, requested for a soil stability test or anything like that. So this first one is for stuff that is part of the contract that we had already agreed upon, things that are agreed upon that I have to provide as the seller. The second one are the additional inspection reports and disclosures. Those are the things that I might have done. Like I said before, I hired a professional home inspector. Maybe I had a previous termite report. Or I had an escrow that fell out, and there was an inspection report that came from that original escrow that fell out. It is my duty to disclose that report to the buyers, right? So if I was in escrow with Jeanette and her buyers canceled, and they supplied me with a home inspection report, which they're required to do, and then that escrow falls out, and I now open escrow with Pedro, I'm required to share that report with Pedro. It's not a if I want to. You have to share it. It's something of knowledge you have. So the best way to do that is to incorporate it into your TDS. So I check off this box, additional inspection reports or disclosures, and I put home inspection dated, whatever, included, like whatever the date it was completed. And I'm going to incorporate that. Now, that becomes part of my disclosure, which means that as is part we've talked about in the purchase agreement, right, where you go back to paragraph 11 and it says the property is sold as is, present physical condition, per disclosures made by the seller, and inspections done by the buyer. Well, now my disclosure just got bigger because not only am I disclosing the stuff that I knew, but I'm also disclosing the stuff that came about in a professional home inspection. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I have a question. So we
Sure.
have to give them the home inspection. I understand that. What if there was another inspection done, like foundation inspection, and they have the report? Do they have to disclose all reports?
Any report that you have, whether you did it or a previous escrow did it, you're required to share that information. Now, you could give them the report, or now you could amend your disclosure and say, we know these things now. So let's say that in the escrow that Jeanette and I originally had, right? If I didn't know that there was a problem with the foundation, right? I didn't know that that was the issue that they found in their professional home inspection, and then they did a foundation inspection, and that's what they found out. I'm not required to change my disclosure to her buyer because I didn't know it. It was found through a professional inspection. But if that escrow falls out and I open a new escrow, I'm required to disclose that knowledge. I know that there's a problem with the foundation, or I know that there's, whatever the issues are. So the easiest way to do that, instead of amending the disclosures completely and saying, now I know it's X, I can attach this report and say, this is the findings and this is how I found out. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, now if you don't have any other reports, then you just check off the box that says no substitute disclosure for this transfer, and you're ready to go. Okay. The seller discloses the following information with the knowledge that even though this is not a warranty, prospective buyers may rely on this information in deciding whether and on what terms to purchase the subject property. Seller hereby authorizes any agents representing the principals in this transaction to provide a copy of this statement to any person or entity in connection with any actual or anticipated sale of the property. So, not too long ago, and I don't remember, I think it was earlier this week or the end of last week, an agent called me, and I don't remember who it was, but that agent said that the buyers were asking for the disclosures with their offer. Right, they wanted all the disclosures. I don't remember what that is. If you're on this meeting, remind me that it was you. But they were asking for the disclosures, right? If you look at this, it says in connection with any actual or anticipated sale of the property. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that disclosures could be delivered to people prior to them having an agreement to purchase. And I've told you guys in the past about agents that provide copies of the disclosures with their counteroffers, right? So that the buyers can acknowledge the disclosures and all in all that information, reports and everything that the seller has, they can acknowledge that with the counteroffer, which means it makes it easier to reduce their investigation periods and things like that. So in this case, in that conversation with that agent, and for some reason I can't remember who it was, I think we finally came to the conclusion of, instead of providing it prior to an offer being submitted, submit an offer and you'll get those disclosures with your counteroffer. So that's what they were going to do. Okay, so if somebody asks for them prior to you guys having it, there's nothing that stops you from providing them because there's an anticipated sale of the property, right? With people who are interested or are submitting offers, even if you don't have already an agreed upon offer. The following are representations made by the seller and are not the representations of the agents, if any. The important thing about agents, if any, is that this TDS doesn't exist because there are two agents representing a seller and a buyer. This transfer disclosure statement is required even if there are no agents involved. The problem is how are the buyers and sellers going to get this form if there are no agents involved? So that's the issue that we deal with. But technically, this disclosure has to be made even if there is no listing agent, even if there is no buyer's agent, right? We just are a buyer and a seller. We met. We decided to do this deal. As seller, I'm still required to provide you all this information. How I'm going to get it is a different story, but I have to provide you with this disclosure and an NHD report and a lead-based paint and an SPQ, right? All of those disclosures, I have to provide that information to you even if there are no agents involved, okay? This information is a disclosure and is not intended to be part of any contract between buyer and seller. So even though this is a disclosure about the condition of the property, it's not necessarily part of the contract, even though it will be. It's weird verbiage because I can get this disclosure, right? So let's look at the timelines for a second. As a buyer, I'm supposed to receive this within 7 days of acceptance. This form, the lead-based paint, the NHD report, right? Any other reports that are city inspections, termites, anything that's agreed upon, I am supposed to receive it within 7 days, right? So if I get it in that first 7 days and I haven't done my home inspection, I haven't done anything, I could technically, when I get this, go through it, read it, look at the condition of the property, and then I could make requests for repairs based on it. And the reason I can do that is because I have a 3-day right of rescission. So I technically could do a request for repairs based on the TDS if I wanted to as a buyer. And then I could do a request for repairs based on the home inspection report that comes in. Now, am I advising that to happen in this market? No, because, sellers are not listening to anything. They're not being reasonable. Neither are listing agents, and buyer's agents are doing crazy, unreasonable things to get their offer accepted. So, no, I'm not saying you could do that. But could I negotiate what's happening with the sale of the house based on this disclosure? Yes, absolutely, you could. Okay? Seller is or is not occupying the property. Again, that doesn't change the level of responsibility. It just is letting them know I'm not living in the property or I am living in the property. Okay. So let's look at this. Now, these boxes should be checked only if those things are remaining with the property as part of the sale, because now I'm disclosing it, right? So if for whatever reason some things that are on here are not remaining, whether you negotiated them out or they are, whatever the deal is. Well, you have to negotiate them out because this is all fixture stuff. Then you're not going to check the box, right? So if for some reason I negotiated that the microwave that was built in is going to stay, because this is not microwave that you have plugged in and sitting on your counter. So remind your clients of that too as you're going through this, doing the TDS. And the reason I say remind them is because they shouldn't be doing this without you. Your seller should not be filling this out. Like, I know that there are agents that just say, hey, here's the TDS, fill it out and send it back to me. It shouldn't happen that way. Now, if you're using Glide, it's a little different because they answer specific questions, and if they have a question about it, they can click it. It doesn't complete the form, and it sends you the question so you can help guide them through the process of filling it out. So it's a little different. But if it's just blindly, here, I left these for you, fill them out, and then you go back them up or they email them to you, don't do it like that. The best way to do it is for you to have a copy of a TDS in front of you, they have one in front of them, and you go step by step with it and have them check the boxes. You guide them, walk them through the disclosure, because there's gonna be things as we go through each one of these items that maybe have small defects that as a homeowner we've gotten used to. And I tell you guys this all the time when we do these TDS classes or when we talk about disclosures, is that there is stuff in your home right now that doesn't necessarily work like it's brand new, but you've gotten used to it. And if it was new to you, this issue, right? Like if you were now going to be the new homeowner of this and there was an issue that existed with that item, it would be annoying, right? Pipes that make noise, things that don't work on the stove. Yes, Patricia.
I just wanted to comment. I used Glide the other day on a Zoom. So we did it together via Zoom. Mm-hmm. And Glide automatically created text addendum pages for the additional text. So that was really time-saving. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, Glide, I think, for disclosures, I think you guys have to really start looking into Glide. And we had them on here talking about how Glide works and adding the documents and all of that stuff. I think you guys should all take a look at it and start using it because it's going to make things a lot easier for you. But as I'm going through these things, I want to be there and guide my client, right? Because if I say to them, okay, so there's a range that's staying. Now, do you guys all know what a range is? Who doesn't know what a range is? Who's going to be brave enough to say, I don't know what a range is, and they're going to unmute and they're going to say me?
Me, I don't know what a range means.
Okay, so thank you, Romy. Thank you. I appreciate your bravery. So here's the thing, right? We've seen stoves in houses, and then we've seen ranges, which are separate from a stove, right? The range is the burners. It's the top part of the stove if you have a one piece. If you don't, if you have those built-in ovens, right? You have ovens that are built into the cabinets. Generally, there's probably a countertop range. Those are the differences, right? So if I have a range and I have ovens, those are built-ins. If I have a stove, that is a personal item because those generally aren't built in. So you have to understand the difference, right? So if the stove is going to stay, right? Let's say that the stove is staying. Then I'm going to check off the range and the oven. I'm going to check off range and oven. And then when I do my explanation at the bottom, I'm going to put range and oven are part of a standalone stove. I'm going to explain that, right? Because I have to clarify that it doesn't say stove. If you guys look at any of these lists, it doesn't say stove. So I got to clarify that that's what it is. Now, if I'm talking about the range with Romy and she has a stove, I know that I'm talking about the burners. I'm going to say, Romy, do all the burners work properly? Like, does everyone light up? Do you have a problem? Do you have to light one with a lighter? Right? Do they all light off of the oh, my mind just went blank. What's that called? The pilot light? Right? We have to ask those questions. Do the knobs all work? Right? Because if you guys ever had a stove where like the knob doesn't quite, you have to push it in all the way because it spins if you don't. Like those little things we have to ask, because if that item is staying, even though I'm not warrantying it, It's going to cause a problem later. I'm going to get a phone call from the buyer's agent as the listing agent. I'm going to have to talk to my seller. It's going to be a nightmare. So I'm going to disclose it now so that they can't ever come back and say, well, you didn't tell us. I told you. It doesn't work. Right? So you have to ask the questions. Now, the way that they changed the TDS, it used to be you would go across as you were talking about it so it makes sense. They changed it so it's one column, the next column, the next column. Okay? So range oven, microwave. Microwave you only have to check off if it's a built-in, right? You have those built-in microwaves that are the range hoods above the ovens or above the stoves. That's the only time that needs to be checked off because otherwise it's personal property, right? You're not leaving those little microwaves behind. Dishwasher. Again, dishwashers are built-in. I know they have portable dishwashers. I know they exist. I have never seen one in a house. So this is a fixture. It is staying. So again, ask them, is there anything that doesn't work quite right with the dishwasher? Just make sure. If they say no, it works fine, great. Then check it and let's move on. Trash compactors, right? If they have a trash compactor, does it work? Right? Is there any problems with it? Move on. Garbage disposal. Does the garbage disposal work? Are there any issues with it? Everything as we go through, we're going to ask the question. And then if there's any issues with those, we're going to do a description down here, right? Because it says, are to the best of your seller's knowledge any of the above that are not in operating condition? Yes or no? If they are, then you're going to write that in here. Guess what? If there's more than one thing, there's not enough room here. So if I already know that, I'm going to type C addendum. Now, what Patricia said was, when she was using Glide, when they were typing in whatever their issues were here, it was automatically creating the text overflow addendums to make space. Okay? So let's go through these things. Washer and dryer hookups. Ask if they're permitted. You got to ask if they're permitted. And especially if they're in the garage or they're outside on a patio. How many of you guys have seen washer and dryer hookups outside on a patio? Right? Those are probably not permitted. So you got to ask the question. If the seller bought them like that, if the seller bought it that way and doesn't know, then we're still going to disclose on here that there's an issue. Those washer and dryer hookups may or may not be permitted the buyer to investigate. Okay? So ask that question. Washer and dryer hookups, you see them in the garage or in the patio, were they permitted? Rain gutters. Okay? As we look at rain gutters, you guys all know rain gutters, they go around the house on the outside to protect from rain. Ask the question, are any of them leaking? Is there any problems with them? Do they stop up? Like, have you fixed them? Do they work properly? Ask the question. I know some of this stuff seems silly, but you got to ask because these are things that become problems. Hey, on your rain gutters where the downspout comes out and it pours out, do you get standing water around there? Does it flood? Does it puddle? You got to ask those questions. It's one of those things is like you have to start thinking about, if I were buying this house, this item that we're talking about right now, the rain gutters, the stove, the things that are staying, would it annoy me if I moved in? Right? So those are the things you got to start thinking of. Burglar alarms. Burglar alarms. What should I ask about a burglar alarm? If I have an alarm system, what questions should I ask the sellers? Anybody? Anybody have an idea?
Are they owned outright or are they leasing it? Or
there you go, Edwin. Yes, I need to find out, is it owned outright? Are they leasing it? What is the payment amount if they own it outright to service and monitor it? Because I want to be able to disclose all this stuff to the buyer because the buyer is taking it, right? So if it's leased, how much is owed, all that stuff, I want to disclose all of that stuff. So you got to ask those questions. Carbon monoxide devices, that's just, do they have them, do they not? If they're not working or working, we're going to disclose that. Fire alarm, usually fire alarms go back into the same thing with the burglar alarms. A lot of times those alarm systems have some kind of a fire or smoke alarm that's included in it. Just disclose that, okay? TV antennas, I don't know how many people have TV antennas on their roofs anymore, but if they do, does it work? Are there any problems with it? You know, that's the questions we have to ask. Satellite dish. Okay, so satellite dish, those are Dish Network and DirecTV, right? That's what most people have. What does DirecTV and Dish Network tell you to do when you're selling your house, when you're moving with those two systems? What do they say to do? Leave the dish, take the box, right? So again, we're going to disclose, even though that's common knowledge that people when they move on are going to take the box, we're going to put in there to disclose, yes, this property has DirecTV, the dish is going to stay, the receiver boxes and remotes are not staying with the property. We're going to disclose that, okay? Intercoms, I don't know any houses that have intercoms anymore, but does it work? That's it. Any issues with it? Central heating, central air conditioning. So really what most houses have is forced air heating, not central heating. We've just accepted that if there's a furnace in the, in the closet or in the basement or wherever they have the furnace and it has, vents throughout the house, we just have accepted that as central heating. It's really forced air heating, but all we want to do is disclose. Is there any issues with it? Does it not work? Are there any rooms that don't get hot or cold? Have you guys ever been in a house that has air conditioning and one room doesn't quite get the same, or part of the house gets really cool and the other house doesn't? If the seller's aware of that, we have to ask that question, disclose it, because they're going to find out when they do their home inspection. They're going to run the air conditioner, they're going to test the temperatures, they're going to find out, and then it's going to become a question about fixing it. If I disclose it in the TDS, there's less chance that we're going to have that discussion of the fix, because I disclosed it to you, I told you that that was the condition and that's how you're buying the house, okay? Evaporator coolers or swamp coolers, not a lot of them around here, but that's just one that works off of water, that works as an air conditioner. Again, the questions with all of these things are there any issues? What doesn't work? Some things we're asking specific questions about, right? Wall and window air conditioners. Okay, so if those, and you know which air conditioner we're talking about, the box air conditioners that go in the window, plug in the wall. If the seller has made no modifications to the window, right? If the air conditioner's in the window and all it is the window's closed, we didn't have to do anything. We didn't have to add anything. We didn't have to take part of the window sill out. We didn't have to make any modifications to the window for that air conditioner to go there. Then that air conditioner becomes personal property, and I can take it as seller, right? As long as I made no modifications. If I've made any modifications, or it's in the wall, have you ever seen those, like the window air conditioners where somebody cut a hole in the wall, they put it in, now it became part of the property? If it's in the wall like that, or the window has been modified in any way, that air conditioner now becomes a fixture and it has to stay. So that's a conversation, again, that you have with the seller when you see window and wall air conditioning. They have to know that they can't, if it's in the wall, they can't just pull it out and leave a hole. Now, you could take it, we can negotiate that because it was in the wall. You can negotiate that the seller's going to keep it, but you're also going to have to put the wall back at least plastered, right? You don't have to paint, but you have to repair the hole. Okay, but ask that question. Sprinklers, again, with the sprinklers, just ask if they're remote, right? If they're on a timer, if they're manual. Are there any sprinklers that don't quite work? Are there sprinklers in the front yard and the backyard, or only in the front yard? So we have to be clear about that. So if there's sprinklers, hey, yeah, we have sprinklers, but they're only in the front, and they're the old kind that we have to turn on with the little, that long wrench, right? They're the little metal sprinklers. Then we have to disclose that, how it works. Oh, that sprinkler in the corner over there, the northwest corner, it doesn't work quite right. It comes on, but it doesn't spray the way it's supposed to. Any issues like that, those are the questions that we have to ask, because we have to remind them, because as homeowners, we start to forget that stuff. Okay? Public sewer system, does it have one? Is it which most of the houses we're going to be dealing with are going to be part of the public sewer system. If it has a septic tank, a sump pump is for people who have basements, so you're probably not going to deal with that very often. Water softeners. What's the question you want to ask about a water softener?
Is it leased? Exactly.
Same thing as the solar panels. Same thing as your alarm systems. Do you own it outright, or are you making payments on it? Okay, because the water softener is connected to the plumbing, and it's technically a fixture. And so you again have to have that conversation with your sellers and be like, Jeanette, I see that you guys have a water softener. You're planning on leaving that with the property, correct? Because they're supposed to. Now, if they say no, then we have to make arrangements for that. We have to make arrangements for that, meaning I would prefer that you disconnect that water softener now before we start showing, put the plumbing back together the way it's supposed to be, and then we don't even market it with the water softener, because I don't want to have to deal with the counters. Or as long as I counter back and say, hey, you're buyer, you're not getting this water softener, we should be okay. but you got to disclose it, and then you got to disclose if it's staying, is it paid off? Because if it's not, they either have to take on that lease or you guys have to pay it off as the seller before we close. Okay. Patio and decking. This is more about a permit issue, right? Because people build patios and do things outside without getting the permits. So if there is a patio or any deck or anything, you just want to ask, was this done with permits? If it wasn't, we want to disclose that there was no permits. Again, the same thing with the gazebo. If there's a gazebo in the back, was it built with permits? Security gates, if they have any. That's all we want to find out. With the garage, is it attached? Is it not attached? Is there a carport and not a garage? Are there automatic garage door openers for whatever garage exists? And how many remote controls are there? Okay, we want to disclose that, because do remote controls for garage door openers get lost, right? People come, they start with 2 or 3 of them and now they end up with 1. So we just want to disclose how many remote controls exist with the property. A sauna. You guys know what a sauna is? Yeah.
Or
Yeah. So if they have a sauna, is there any problems with it? Temperature works fine. Any issues? Is it permitted? I would even ask on that. Okay. Hot tub spa. Do you guys know the difference between hot tub and spa?
no.
No? Anybody know the difference between a hot tub and a spa? Because it says hot tub / spa. So there's a difference. But do you guys know what it is? I mean, people usually just call it the same thing. Hot tub has no bubbles.
But bubbles.
Yeah, hot tub has no bubbles. Spa has bubbles, right? The jets. That's the difference. So just know that if it's a spa, make sure that you check the box and you say this is a spa, and then talk about if there's any problems with it, any issues that the temperature doesn't work right or jets that aren't working. Disclose. Like, that's, again, we have to ask all those questions because people aren't going to remember. Does it have a locking safety cover on that spa or a hot tub? Most people don't have one, right? So just be careful. Make sure before they say, oh, yeah, it's a locking safety cover, when it's just that big foam cover, right, that folds over. Just make sure that it truly is a locking safety cover, okay? The pool. Any issues with the pool, right? How long has the pool been there, maybe? Do you have any leaking problems? Or is there anything wrong, any issues with the filters, with the heater? Any of that stuff, right? We want to disclose any of that stuff. Does it have a child-resistant barrier? Don't guess, right? Even if it has a fence, doesn't necessarily mean it is a child-resistant barrier, right? There are certain things that have to happen with that fence in order for it to be child-resistant, right? Like it has to have only vertical bars. It has to have a self-locking gate. It has to be a certain height. There's all kinds of things. So don't just assume because there's a gate. Ask the question, is that a child-resistant barrier? Like, that's how we got it done? Because now pools that are built now have to be built that way, but previously they didn't have to have them. So just be careful if you mark yes on that and make sure that it truly is. Is this heater gas, solar, or electric? Right? Which is it? Is there any problems with it? Is it working? Is there, whatever the questions you need to ask about that pool heater, just make sure that you check it off and you explain the information about it. The water heater for the house, gas, solar, or electric. The majority of the people that we're dealing with, the majority of the houses we're selling are gas. But again, ask them any questions that have. Does it make noise? Does it rattle? Does the water get hot? Does it? Ask all the questions that you can think of with a water heater. The water supply. The majority of us are going to be the city. Some are private utility. Some of the places out in the high desert and stuff, you may be on a well, but ask what it is. There shouldn't be anything else that goes past that other than just checking off where the water supply comes from. The gas supply, the same thing. The majority of the things that we're going to sell, most of the properties we're going to sell are going to be the utility. But again, high desert mountains, they might have those big propane bottles outside the property. Window screens. Okay? Window screens. I'm going to ask them, are all the windows have screens on them? Because sometimes they don't. Are any of the screens torn or broken? Because I want to disclose that. And why are torn window screens or missing window? Why are torn window screens important? What could be the problem? With torn window screens, you're going to have a problem. You're going to have a problem with FHA, even missing ones. So again, disclose it. Even as your seller, tell them, hey, maybe we want to fix this, right, to replace it. So ask the questions. Security bars. Anybody sell a house with window security bars before? Yeah. So window security bars in the bedrooms are supposed to have quick release mechanisms on the bedroom windows. And what that is an easy way for those bars to open up so people can get egress during a fire, right? Now, if we go to a house that doesn't have those quick release bars and they have security bars, we're going to check the box and we're going to have to disclose that we don't have those quick release mechanisms on the bedroom windows. The problem is that's not legal. They have to be there, so chances are that they're going to be required to fix them or remove them. But you can't say to them, hey, see those window bars? You got to take them off because they're not legal, right? Because they don't have the quick release. There's a reason why people have window bars, right? Like, you don't live in a nice neighborhood and put bars on your window. So if I tell them you got to take those window bars off and they do, and then something happens, they could hold me responsible because I made them take it off. What I would say to a seller is, look, you have two choices. Legally, they have to have quick releases on them. Yours don't. So you either have to get them fixed and put the quick release on, or you're going to have to remove them, but that's up to you. I can't tell you what to do. If you want to leave them that way, that's up to you. But it's going to be an issue in our transaction. But I'm not going to tell them they got to take them off. But it is going to be a problem during the transaction. But again, whatever I'm going to do, I'm going to disclose it. Okay? And then water conserving plumbing fixtures. Do they know? Like, here's the thing. If you've changed any toilets or faucets or anything in your house in the last 10 years, it's water conserving. Okay? Even probably in the last 20 years, it's water conserving. Especially here in California, so I would assume that most people do, but if they have really old fixtures and stuff, then you have to ask the question. Okay, if you don't know, don't check the box. Then we're going to talk about the exhaust fans, where they are, right? We have exhaust fans in bathrooms, exhaust fans in the kitchen. Anywhere there's an exhaust fan, we're going to write down that's where they are. If we're going to ask them, do they know if they have any 220 volt wiring? They may not know. If they don't know, don't put anything in there. Fireplaces, wherever there is a fireplace. Does it have a gas starter? If it does, but yes. If it doesn't work, so many times I've seen gas starter fireplace where the gas is disconnected or it's not working properly. Please make sure you disclose it. The roof, whatever the type of the roof is, right? Whether it's shingle or it's tiles or it's wood shake, which there shouldn't be any of those. What the type of title, whatever the best guess that they have on the age and what type it is, anything else that you want to disclose. Now, again, at the bottom under here is where we're going to talk about any defects with any of those items that we listed. So if there's too many to fit here, I'm going to put see addendum, and we're going to fill out an addendum. Okay? Questions on the first page? Anybody? No? All right. Let's move on. Second page. I wish this was formatted better, but it says, are you, the seller, aware of any significant defects, malfunctions in any of the following? Yes or no? If yes, check appropriate spaces below. So they want to know, do you know of any significant defects or malfunctions in interior walls, ceilings, floors, exterior walls, insulation, the roof, the windows, the doors, the foundations, the driveways, the sidewalks, the walls, the fences, electrical systems, plumbing, sewer, septics, or other structural components? Now, here's the thing. This is not, there's a nail hole in the wall. That is not a significant defect or malfunction. We're talking about big things, right? When we're talking about these, are there any major defects, problems with the ceiling? Now, if there was some flood damage, right, like water damage in the ceiling, I would pick that. But a little crack on the wall, a little hole in the wall, for this as a defect, no. When you're doing your visual inspection as an agent, I might say, there's a hole in the wall or a crack on the wall. But for this, it's got to be something major. Like doors, the door doesn't close. The foundation, there's a crack in the foundation. The driveway, it's, if it's a shared driveway, I may put yes and put the driveway because there could be some issues with, the property line or usage of that driveway. Sidewalks, walls, fences, the same thing. If the wall, people have those cinder block walls and it's like cracked and you can see a big separation, that I would put, those kind of things. Electrical systems, if I know that I have an older electrical system that has problems, right? I got breakers that pop off when I use too many things and stuff like that. Yes. Plumbing, sewer, septic, any problems I have, I get backup. You know, every 6 months my sewer line backs up because I have the tree outside. You know, when I start to shower and do this, the plumbing rattles, right? Those kind of things I would definitely disclose. Okay, so you're going to describe it, check all this stuff. If you need space, you're going to put it on an addendum, right, and attach it to this. Okay, questions about those items, about the defects. Remember, it's major stuff. It's not just like, oh, I see a stain on the driveway from a car dripping oil. That's not something you need to disclose here in your TDS. Okay, you don't need to get crazy with that. Okay. Installation of a listed appliance, device, or amenity is not a precondition of sale or transfer of the dwelling. What that means is if by accident I check off on here that, you know, it has a microwave or whatever, it doesn't mean I have to now install one because I checked it on the TDS. Okay, it doesn't mean I have to install it. It technically doesn't even mean it has to stay. It's just this is the condition of the property right now. But it's just saying you don't have to. Because I checked off range on the TDS, I'm not required to install a range in the property. Okay? But we have to get carbon monoxide and smoke detectors and stuff. That has to be installed. We get that. So we're going to skip over that part. So here are the questions. It says, are you, seller, aware of any of the following? Okay? Substances, materials, or products which may be an environmental hazard, such as, but not limited to, asbestos, formaldehyde, radon, lead-based paint, mold, fuel, or chemical storage tanks, and contaminated soil or water on the subject property. Are you aware of? That's the question you're asking your seller. If your seller says, no, I'm not aware of it, then guess what? The answer is no. We don't need to dig into it. But what about this? Or did you think about that? Or have you been to this? No. Are you aware of any of these things? No? Check no. Features of the property shared in common with adjoining landowners, such as walls, fences, driveways, whose use or responsibility for maintenance may have an effect on the subject property. Now, we're going to ask that question. Do you know of any of them? If they say to you, well, I don't think so, but you know that their wall in their backyard is shared between the neighbors, right? It's one fence, and it's on the property line, which means that it does affect both properties. Then you're going to tell them, yes. Hey, don't forget your backyard fence. We need to put it. We need to mark that down because it's shared between all of your neighbors, the one behind you and the one to either side of you. So we need to mark yes and write that explanation. So sometimes we're going to have to remind them of things, but what I'm saying is don't dig stuff up and then force them to say yes. Remember, are they aware of it? You know, and they are aware that that fence is shared. It's just they don't think of that as being something that's shared by adjoining landowners. Okay, same thing with shared driveways. Okay. Any encroachments, easements, or similar matters that may affect your interest in the subject property. Again, if they don't know, they don't know. Guess what will show up? If there is encroachments and easements, they will show up on the preliminary title report. And remember, any report that I'm required to provide that is going to cover the information that is listed here protects me as a disclosure. So if I don't know that there's an easement or an encroachment, which a lot of times people don't know, and it shows up on my preliminary title report, I'm still protected as far as disclosure goes. Okay? These things are stuff that they should know, though. Room additions, structural modifications, or other alterations or repairs made without necessary permits. Have you guys done anything to the house without getting permits? Now, remember, just about everything requires a permit, to be honest. Like changing a toilet technically requires a permit. People don't do that. But we're talking about, did you add a room? Did you wall in a patio outside, right? Did you enclose a patio? Did you, things like that. Did you do any of that stuff without permits? Did you make this room bigger? Did you knock down a wall? Did you put up a wall? Any of these things that you may have done without permits. Now, the next one says, room additions, structural modifications, or other alterations or repairs not in compliance with building codes. So, here's where the two are a little bit different. I could technically have done all kinds of repairs in my house without permits, but they could all be to code. But I can't do repairs and modifications on my property that aren't to code and have them be permitted. Do you see the difference? Right? So technically I could say, are there any structural modifications or other alterations or repairs made without necessary permits? Yes, there were. Right? And I could put that down. And then when it says, are there any structural modifications or alterations not in compliance with building codes, that could still be a no. Because I could be a contractor, I could be somebody, and I know the building codes, and I could have done it all to building code. I just didn't choose to get the permits. Most of the time, it's going to be both of those are going to be yes if I did something without permits. Most of the time. But could it be yes and a no? Sure, it could be. But most of the time, those are going to be yeses. Okay, so then you're just going to put yes and what was that, and you're going to write that information down below. Fill, compacted, or otherwise on the property, that's fill dirt, like they filled in a big hole, either it got compacted or it didn't. People who have removed a pool, that's fill, right? They compact that dirt and they fill in the pool. So that's, again, are you aware of that? Yes or no? Answer the question. Any settling from any cause or slippage, sliding, or other soil problems? Again, are you aware of any problems? Is there any issue with the soil? Has the house moved? Has it shifted? Are there cracks that have been diagnosed as settling cracks with the property? If no, then put no. Flooding, drainage, or grading problems. Now, this one's another one that you may have to remind them of. Hey, by the way, when it rains, is there places where there's standing water for a really long time? When you water a lawn, does the property, does it flood in certain parts of the property when you're watering? Those kind of questions. And I've shared with you guys before, I had a buyer purchase a home, loved the house. They didn't ask for repairs in the backyard because they were going to redo the entire backyard. They bought the house like in March, and by April it started crazy rainstorm, and all the water from the backyard was coming onto the patio and just running into the crawl space under the house, just floods of water, right? They had to put sandbags up and the whole thing. Now, because they were planning on redoing the whole backyard, they didn't go after the seller, but the seller did not disclose that was a flooding issue. So probably because they didn't think of it. How often does it rain here, to be honest? So it could have been a year between the last rainstorm where they had that issue, and they didn't remember that they had that problem. So again, we have to ask those questions sometimes. Hey, is there anywhere that there's a lot of water accumulation, a lot of standing water for a lot of days after rain? Do you have any flooding problems from rain? Is there any sections of the property that hold water and keep it up against the house? Those kind of questions. So just ask those questions, okay? Major damage to the property or any of the structures from fire, earthquake, floods, or landslides. That's pretty easy. Yes or no answer. We either know that or we don't. Any zoning violations, non-conforming uses, violations of setback requirements. Again, they would know. If there was a problem with that, they would have been notified already. Neighborhood noise problems or other nuisances. Now that becomes, again, for them like an opinion, but you just have to ask the question. Is there anything that happens, right, with any of your close neighbors that cause a lot of noise and cause problems? Ask them that question. We can't make stuff up. We can't try to tell them, well, that isn't that noisy, or is it? Just ask them, is there anything that noise you think about it as if you were moving here for the first time, right? Because we've had people that, there's people that live underneath the airplane, right, the path for the landing for LAX, and probably when they first lived there couldn't get past it, and now it just doesn't even register that they hear that noise, right? So just ask them, is there anything, right? Is there a lot of air traffic, anything that bothered you when you first moved in that you've just gotten used to? Because we want to make sure that we're notifying the buyer before, okay? CC&Rs, right? So that's the covenant codes and restrictions, or deed restrictions or obligations. So you just have to ask. Most of the time, it's only going to be in PUDs and townhomes and condos and things like that. But there are some communities that do have deed restrictions, even though they're super old and probably not enforceable anymore. We just have to ask if they know of any. Any homeowners association which has the authority over the subject property. Again, PUDs, townhomes, condos, those are usually where it's going to be. So if they are, which they are, you yes, and you explain it. Any common area facilities such as pools, tennis courts, walkways, or other areas co-own or in undivided interest with others. Again, condos, townhouses, PUDs that have public areas that you share. That's what you're going to answer yes for. Any notices of abatement or citations against the property. Again, you just have to ask them, have you got any citations, or you have any substandards, any problems with the city as far as your home is concerned. Any lawsuits by or against the seller threatening to or affecting this real property. Claims for damages by the seller pursuant to section 910 or 914, threatening to affect this real property. Claims for breach of warranty pursuant. So is there any lawsuit that has anything to do, any kind of litigation that has anything to do with this property at all, right? Mechanics liens, anything like that. Stuff that is going to affect me being able to transfer the property. That's what we have to look at, right? So that's the question they have to ask. Now, if they don't have anything, they would know, obviously, if they were involved in a lawsuit. If they're not, then, we move on. It's a no, and that's it. Okay, so questions about those 16 questions. Questions about those? Anybody? Hold on one second. All right, I'm back. So any questions? Those 16 questions that we went through, any questions? If any of those were a yes, then we have to go down here and explain those yeses above. Okay? So any questions about those? At all? No? All right. Okay.
Kyle.
Yes.
Hi, this is Sonia.
Yes, Sonia.
What about what would you call it? Problems with the neighbors due to the fence. Do we disclose it if the seller discloses it to us?
Yeah, well, the seller needs to disclose that, and you would do it here. You could do it on both part of the, like, you could do it here where the feature shared in common when you're sharing that, or you could do it down here as neighborhood noise problems or other nuisances. But I would suggest if it's specific to a dispute because of a shared fence, that I disclose it when I check yes next to the shared features.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to, because look, if I'm having a problem as the homeowner and I leave, and the problem has to do with something that's shared with the property, that new homeowner that moves in is going to have the same issue with that neighbor, so I have to disclose it.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Question.
Yes, Patricia.
Kyle, you mentioned that they have 3 days for response, right? So is that 3 days from when we send it? Because the day we send it to their folks may delay in sending it to the actual buyer.
No, okay. So we're gonna go back for a second too. That's why in the counter offers, paragraph 31, I always put in there that the buyer's agent receiving any documentation for the transaction is the same as the buyer receiving it, right? That's right. We're agreeing to that. But that's also why we, as listing agent, we put the delivery of notices addendum that says, hey, if I email it to you on this date, it's determined that it's delivered as long as it was sent to this person, right? Right. So you have to do those two things to question. But yeah, I mean, technically, it's a 5-day right of rescission because we do everything electronically. I don't walk over to you and hand you the TDS, right? Mm-hmm. With a 3-day right of rescission, everybody kind of gets behind, so it's okay. But what that means is not 3 days. I don't have 3 days to respond to you. I have 3 days to just say, I'm out. Based on what you disclosed to me, I'm canceling, and you can't stop me.
Is that even after they've dropped all of their contingencies?
Yes. So if a buyer has removed all their inspection contingencies and then all of a sudden you amend your TDS because something has changed, right? Like you got a new leak that you didn't have before, and now I have to amend my disclosure. That 3-day right or 5-day right of rescission kicks back in, and I have the right to cancel, and there's nothing you can do about it. Can't stop it. But that doesn't. But they have 17 days to return all of these signed and acknowledged, right? Or whatever you guys have negotiated with your contingency periods.
I have 7 days. I'm on a shortened time frame, and this is the only document they haven't responded to.
But what do you mean they haven't responded to? Like you sent it to them and they haven't signed and returned it?
My transaction coordinator sent it to them, and they have not responded. Correct.
Okay, send them a notice to perform if it's past their time periods.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Alfredo, you had a question?
Yeah, what about if it's a personal issue with your neighbors, like they don't get along? Do you have to disclose that?
I wouldn't.
Okay.
I wouldn't, because that if it's just a personal issue, like I hate that guy, well, you're leaving. So maybe you're the jerk, right? Like, you know what I mean? It's probably going to be okay for somebody else moving in there. But no, that's like my neighbor and I have a beef. I don't need to tell you about it because I'm leaving.
But what about other neighbors have the same beef with that same neighbor?
Maybe because the neighbors are gonna tell the buyer,
Okay.
right? So like if there's one shitty neighbor, pardon my language, if there's one bad neighbor and everybody on the block has an issue with this guy, then yeah, I probably would.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Just remember, here's the thing that I usually like to say. If you have to ask, should I disclose it, then the answer is probably yes. More often than not, it's going to be yes, right? Should I disclose this? The answer is probably going to be yes, right? If it takes that thought. Okay. Okay. The seller certifies that the property as of yes.
I'm
Sonia.
sorry. I have a probate listing. Are we?
No.
Is it mandatory to?
Probates aren't required. Don't require TDS. What they do require is a form called the exempt seller's disclosure. But if the person who is the administrator of the estate does have specific knowledge of the property, then they are required to make some disclosures. It's not like they get to wipe their hands. If they know, they have to disclose. But the only required disclosure from them is the exempt seller's disclosure and the NHD report and the lead-based paint, but not a TDS and not an SPQ.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, seller certifies that the property as of the close of escrow will be in compliance with Section 111 of the Health and Safety Code by having operable smoke detectors, which are approved, listed, and installed in accordance with state fire marshals. Seller certifies the property at close of escrow will be in compliance with Section 19211 of the Health and Safety Code by having water heater tanks braced, anchored, strapped in place in accordance with applicable law. Okay, so the seller's going to sign that they have that all this stuff is true that they said above. The next section is for the agent for the seller, the agent for the buyer, okay, and then the sellers and buyers are going to sign down here that they've seen this. Now, for you guys, it says see attached agent visual inspection disclosure form, right? The three boxes are agent, the attached AVID, agent notes no items for disclosure, or agent notes the following items. Okay, you guys are required to provide an AVID. That's not a state requirement. That's an office requirement. Not all offices require AVIDs. I think the majority of them do now. Not all of them do. But your AVID technically needs to be done at the same time as this because it's part of the TDS. So if I have to deliver the TDS in 7 days, guess when your AVID is supposed to be delivered? In 7 days. And that goes for you as the buyer's agents also. And I know the majority of you, because I check files, don't do your AVIDs until you absolutely have to, which is usually in your final walkthrough. So please start doing them at the beginning because technically they are part of this form. They're part of the TDS. They're incorporated into it. So they got to be provided in that first 7 days and signed. So check off the box for your attached AVID. You put your name, sign it, date it. Same thing for the other side. Then the sellers and buyers will sign it. You guys will sign it again after it's all done, and we're complete. Now, TDSs are required for all sales except for trusts that are being sold by the successor trustee. If it's the original trustee or the successor trustee had this as their principal residence, they still have to provide a TDS. A probate does not require one, like we just talked about with Sonia, and REOs do not require one. Okay, so every other sale you're going to do will require it. Okay, any other questions before I let you guys go, because it's already after 12? Anything else? No? All right, guys, thank you. I appreciate you sitting and listening and droning on about contracts. I will see you all tomorrow in the sales meeting, but otherwise have a productive and great rest of your day. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.